It was a quiet night on Earth. The stars sparkled above, and the usual hum of city life continued without pause. The world was unaware of the quiet storm that was building. People went to bed, not knowing that in a far-off galaxy, an alien race was preparing to invade. Humans had been comfortable, living their lives in peace, believing they were alone in the universe. But the truth was, they had always been watched. For years, extraterrestrial species had been observing Earth from afar. They knew that humanity was weak, divided, and unsuspecting. They had always kept their distance, waiting for the right moment. The moment had come. In the dead of night, while most of the world slept, ships began to descend from the sky. At first, it was just a few small flashes, tiny disturbances in the atmosphere. But soon, the air was filled with the sound of engines roaring as dozens of massive spacecraft broke through Earth's skies. They didn't land. No, that would have been too obvious. Instead, they hovered, cloaked in a darkness that seemed to pulse with an eerie energy. The military detected the ships quickly, but they weren't ready for what was coming. No one had ever imagined that the invasion would happen so suddenly, so violently. It wasn't an attack on cities or landmarks. This was a quiet war. A war of minds. In an isolated desert region, a group of soldiers was stationed at a remote base. They received the first signal, a strange alien message, transmitted directly into their minds. The soldiers, in confusion and fear, tried to make sense of the cryptic words that echoed in their heads. But then came the second signal, and with it, the realization that this wasn't a friendly message. The alien force was preparing to engage. They were not here for diplomacy. They were here for something much worse, an invasion that would reshape everything. Captain Jason, the leader of this small group, tried to take command, barking orders to his team. "Prepare the defenses," he shouted, his voice hoarse with urgency. "Get the weapons ready. We don't know who or what is coming, but we need to be ready for anything." But even as he spoke, he could feel a strange pressure in the air, something that made him shiver despite the heat of the desert night. Suddenly, there was a flash of light, and before anyone could react, the soldiers were thrown off their feet. The sky lit up, as if the sun had risen early. But it wasn't the sun. The light was coming from the ships above, their engines glowing with unnatural energy. The ground shook beneath them, and the air seemed to grow thick, making it harder to breathe. In that moment, Jason knew that this wasn't just an attack. This was an invasion. They weren't prepared for this. No one on Earth was prepared for what was about to unfold. And then, just as quickly as it began, the light vanished. The ships were gone, leaving only an oppressive silence in their wake. The soldiers stood, confused, their weapons still raised but uncertain of what to do next. But then, the silence was broken by a single voice. It was clear, commanding, and full of an unfamiliar authority. "Keep looking at them, and I'll bite," the voice echoed in their minds. Jason froze. His heart pounded in his chest. The voice was not human. It was alien, a sound that was both beautiful and terrifying, echoing with a promise of danger. He tried to locate the source of the voice, but there was nothing. No one around them was speaking. It was as though the words had come from nowhere directly into their minds. "Who's there?" Jason shouted, looking up to the sky, but no response came. He could feel the pressure of the voice in his head, like it was pushing him to understand something he couldn't yet grasp. He turned to his soldiers. They were as confused and scared as he was. "This isn't just an invasion," one of them whispered. "It's something more, something personal." Jason's thoughts raced. They weren't prepared for an enemy that could invade their minds. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the promise in those words, "I'll bite." What did that mean? What kind of enemy were they facing? And why had they chosen to make their presence known in such a strange, cryptic way? Jason looked out into the desert, the vast emptiness stretching out before him. He could feel it. Something was coming. Something worse than they had ever imagined. And as the soldiers began to scramble, preparing for whatever came next, Jason couldn't shake the feeling that they had just entered a war they couldn't win. The night had fallen silent again. But Jason knew it wouldn't stay that way for long. They had no idea what was about to come crashing down on them. But they would find out soon enough. The invasion had begun. Asterisk as the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, Captain Jason and his team sat in tense silence at their base. The desert was still, but the air felt heavy as though something was lingering just out of sight. Jason's mind raced, replaying the cryptic words again and again. If you keep looking at them, I'll bite. What could that possibly mean? And who had said it? Suddenly, a distant rumble shook the ground beneath. Their feet! Jason's head snapped up, his eyes scanning the sky. The military sensors had picked up strange readings again. There was no time to waste. He barked orders to his team. Get to your posts. Now, we've got incoming. The soldiers scrambled to their positions, their weapons ready, but Jason could see the fear in their eyes. They were soldiers, trained for combat, but this was unlike anything they had ever faced. Whatever was out there wasn't just an enemy. It was something else entirely. And then, the ground trembled once more. This time it wasn't distant, it was close. Too close. Out of nowhere, a figure emerged from the edge of the desert. It was tall, humanoid, but not human. The figure was covered in orange, russet-colored fur, its face fox-like with sharp ears and glowing eyes that seemed to pierce through the dust storm. Its movements were graceful but predatory, like a creature used to stalking its prey. Jason's breath caught in his throat as the creature stepped closer. It was one of them, the aliens. This was no ordinary alien. This was a Vulpine, a being from a far-off world, known for their agility, cunning, and fierce nature. The Vulpines were not just conquerors, they were hunters. The creature's eyes locked onto Jason's, and he felt a chill run down his spine. For a moment, he couldn't move. The words from before echoed in his mind once again. If you keep looking at them, I'll bite. Was this the one who had spoken to him? Was this the one who had invaded his thoughts? The Vulpine woman tilted her head, her eyes narrowing in amusement. I warned you, she said aloud now, her voice melodic but tinged with something dangerous. Her lips curled into a sly grin, showing sharp, canine teeth. Jason's soldiers raised their weapons, but the Vulpine didn't flinch. She merely smiled, her teeth gleaming under the growing sunlight. Do you think your weapons will stop me? She asked with an almost mocking tone. Your guns are nothing against me. Jason's mind raced. He had heard of the Vulpines before, legendary warriors who had conquered entire planets. But this was something else. The power they wielded wasn't just physical. It was something deeper. What do you want? Jason shouted, trying to keep his voice steady, though his heart was pounding in his chest. The Vulpine woman's smile deepened. You misunderstand, she said, stepping closer, her every movement graceful and dangerous. What I want is irrelevant. What matters is what you want. And you'll find that we're far more alike than you think. Jason's eyes narrowed. He knew better than to trust anything an enemy said, especially one so confident in their power. But then, without warning, she leapt forward, faster than any human could react. The soldiers fired, but the Vulpine was already gone, vanishing into the dust and shadows of the desert. She reappeared in an instant, now standing atop a rock formation. With a perfect view of the base, her laugh echoed through the desert air, sending a shiver down Jason's spine. You'll never defeat me. Not like this, she said, her voice booming as if it was everywhere, inside their minds. But you'll be forced to understand. To feel. I'll make sure of that. Jason clenched his fists, anger and fear mixing within. He had to protect his team, protect Earth, but how? Nothing they had was going to stop this alien threat. Before he could react, The Vulpine spoke again, her voice soft but full of venom. "If you keep looking at me, I'll bite." Jason's blood ran cold. The meaning behind the words became clear. This wasn't a mere threat, it was a challenge. She wasn't just coming for their planet, she was coming for their minds. And the longer they faced her, the more she would twist their thoughts and break their will. "Prepare yourselves," Jason ordered, his voice firm despite the panic clawing at his chest. "This is only the beginning." As his soldiers braced for what was to come, Jason couldn't shake the feeling that they were already losing the battle, not just against the Vulpine, but against their own fear and uncertainty. The real war was only just beginning. And it wasn't going to be fought with weapons. Dada was going to be fought with willpower. The desert air was thick with tension as Jason and his team braced for what would come next. The Vulpine had disappeared into the shifting sand dunes, but her presence lingered in their minds. Her words echoed relentlessly, a haunting reminder that their enemies were no longer just physical threats. They were invaders of the mind, too. Jason paced back and forth, his mind racing. He had never felt so vulnerable before. His soldiers were shaken, their weapons still in hand, but they knew that they weren't up against anything ordinary. The Vulpine, this alien hunter, had proven that their guns, their technology, meant nothing in the face of her power. She had made it clear that they could not win this war with force alone. Jason knew they needed to outsmart her. But that was easier said than done. How could they defeat an enemy who could control the very thoughts of their enemies? An alien who seemed to be always one step ahead, reading their minds before they could even think. One of the soldiers, Private Alex, voiced what everyone was thinking. "Sir, how are we supposed to fight an enemy who can mess with our heads like this? We can't even trust our own thoughts anymore." Jason didn't have an answer. He glanced out across the desert, his mind drifting back to the words of the Vulpine. "If you keep looking at me, I'll bite." Was it some sort of warning, a challenge? Or was it something deeper, a warning that she could do more than just hurt them physically? The mental and emotional toll of facing such an enemy was unimaginable. "We need to stick together," Jason said finally, his voice low but firm. "We can't let her get into our heads. Whatever she wants, whatever her game is, we have to hold the line." The team nodded, but Jason could tell that doubt still lingered in their eyes. The Vulpine had already proven that she could twist their perception of reality, and their minds were vulnerable. Then, just as the weight of the situation began to settle in, a sudden noise interrupted their thoughts. A low hum, growing louder. A ripple in the air, distorting the landscape around them. Jason's instincts screamed something was wrong. Without a word, he motioned for his team to get ready. They raised their weapons, scanning the horizon. But it wasn't until the ground beneath them trembled that they understood. From the distance, something massive was approaching, an enormous figure cloaked in shadow. The Vulpine was back, but this time, she wasn't alone. She was accompanied by a legion of others, alien warriors who moved with silent, predatory grace. The ground shook as they marched forward, their footsteps synchronized, as if they were part of a single, unstoppable force. The Vulpine leader stood at the front of the group, her eyes glowing in the desert twilight. She smirked at Jason and his team. "You think you can stop us? You're not even fighting the real war." Jason gritted his teeth, trying to keep his composure. "What do you want from us?" he demanded, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at him. The Vulpine leader's grin widened. "We're not here to take your land. We're not here to destroy your cities. No, we're here for something far more valuable, your minds." She stepped forward, her presence overwhelming, as though the very air around her was charged with power. "You're not just fighting for your survival anymore. You're fighting for your very thoughts. You'll learn that the mind is the most powerful weapon in the universe. And when I've won, you won't even remember what it feels like to be free." Her words cut deep, like a blade slicing through the fabric of reality itself. Jason could feel his mind teetering on the edge, the weight of her words threatening to unravel everything. "We won't let you win," Jason said, his voice filled with a newfound resolve. "We will fight back." The Vulpine leader laughed. But it wasn't a cruel laugh, it was a knowing one. "You think you can fight me with your willpower alone? You think your fragile minds can stand against the force of an entire species? You have no idea what you're up against." As she spoke, the others around her began to chant in unison, their voices like a low hum that seemed to resonate with the very core of the earth. The sound was hypnotic, pulling at Jason's thoughts, distorting them. He could feel his resolve wavering, the darkness creeping into his mind. But then, just as quickly as it had begun, the chanting stopped. The Vulpine leader's gaze fixed on him, her expression changing from smug amusement to something more dangerous, focused, intense. She was in his mind. Jason fought back with everything he had. He clenched his fists and gritted his teeth, pushing against the pressure building in his head. It was like trying to hold back a flood with his bare hands, but he refused to give in. "You won't break me," Jason muttered under his breath. He forced himself to focus, to block out her influence. But it wasn't just him who was at risk. Anymore, his soldiers were showing signs of losing control, their faces pale, eyes wide with fear. The Vulpine leader stepped closer. "You're already broken," she whispered, her voice no longer a command, but a cold truth. "You just don't know it yet." With one final piercing look, she turned away, her followers following suit. The desert air grew still again, leaving Jason and his team in a suffocating silence. The battle for their minds had begun. The real war wasn't fought with weapons. It was fought with fear, with willpower, and with the mind. And in that moment, Jason realized that they were losing before they even had a chance to fight back. The night had settled like a heavy blanket over the base, but Jason couldn't sleep. The shadows of the Vulpine lingered in his mind, their words twisting through his thoughts like a poison. "You're already broken." The phrase echoed, relentless and unnerving. He knew his team felt it too, the strain of an enemy that didn't just attack the body, but reached deep into the soul, bending minds to their will. Jason sat at the table in the command room, his hands clenched into fists, staring at the map of the desert in front of him. The Vulpine were more than an alien threat. They were invaders of perception. They weren't here to destroy buildings or kill in the conventional sense. They wanted to break them from the inside out. They wanted to make them forget what it meant to be human. The door creaked open, and Private Alex stepped in, his face pale, eyes bloodshot. He had been one of the first to show signs of the Vulpine's influence. His thoughts had seemed scattered, his actions erratic. Jason had tried to ignore it, but now he wasn't so sure. "Captain," Alex spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. I can't stop hearing her voice." His hands trembled as he clasped them together. "I know I'm not the only one. They're in all of our heads, aren't they?" Jason stood and walked over to Alex, placing a firm hand on his shoulder. "We're going to fight this. We just have to stay strong. We all have to." Alex nodded, but the fear in his eyes didn't fade. The longer they were exposed to the Vulpine's presence, the harder it became to resist. It wasn't physical pain they were enduring. It was something far more insidious. "Have you heard anything more?" Jason asked, lowering his voice. Alex hesitated, looking down. "I keep hearing her say, 'If you keep looking at them, I'll bite.' She says it over and over. It's like she's waiting for me to break, to look away." Jason's brow furrowed. That was it. That was the key. They were being toyed with, manipulated into thinking that looking at the Vulpine meant facing defeat. But it was all part of the strategy to make them doubt themselves, to make them afraid. She was playing with them. "We can't look away, Alex," Jason said, his voice steady but filled with conviction. That's what she wants. The moment we start doubting ourselves, we lose. Alex looked up at him, his eyes searching for any shred of hope. But how do we win, Captain? How do we fight something we can't even touch? Jason took a deep breath. The answer wasn't easy, but he had to find a way to explain it. We fight with our minds. The Vulpine are masters of manipulation, but we have something they don't. Our willpower, the power to resist. Alex shook his head. It doesn't feel like we're winning. Jason couldn't argue with that. The Vulpine were relentless, their influence ever present, and it was clear that the longer they fought, the harder it became to hold on to their sense of self. The team was breaking down. But Jason wasn't about to give up. He knew that if they gave in to fear, the Vulpine would win without ever lifting a finger. Suddenly, a low hum filled the air, vibrating through the walls of the base. Jason's heart skipped a beat. The Vulpine were back. But this time, something was different. The sound wasn't just a physical presence, it was a sensation, like a vibration that shook the very foundation of their minds. Jason grabbed Alex by the arm and pulled him toward the window. The sky was dark, but the stars were obscured by an unsettling red glow. It wasn't the usual desert heat that gave the sky its color. This was something else. Something unnatural. And then, they saw her. The Vulpine leader. She stood on the horizon, her body framed by the glowing red sky, a figure of grace and power. Her eyes shone like twin moons, staring directly at them. But this time, she didn't move. She didn't speak. She simply watched. It was as though she was waiting for them to make a move. To break. The silence was deafening. Jason's mind screamed at him to act. He couldn't let her get to them. Not now. He turned to Alex, his face hardening with resolve. This is it. We face her head on. We don't let her control us. Alex nodded, though the uncertainty in his eyes remained. He had been struggling, like everyone else, but Jason knew he had to lead by example. They couldn't allow themselves to fall into the trap. Not when the stakes were so high. As they geared up and stepped outside, the full scale of the Vulpine's presence became clear. There were more of them now, shapes in the darkness, moving just beyond the edge of the base. Jason couldn't tell how many there were, but he knew they were surrounded. The base was their last line of defense. If it fell, Earth was next. Vulpine leader raised her hand, and the hum in the air grew louder, more intense. Jason could feel it pressing against his mind, like a weight that threatened to crush him. It was a mental assault, designed to make him question everything, to break his focus. But he held firm. He focused on the one thing he knew was real. The soldiers beside him. Their unity, their strength, the bond that held them together despite the overwhelming odds. We don't fight alone, Jason muttered to himself. Not today, Alex replied, his voice more certain than before. The Vulpine leader smirked, sensing their renewed resolve. You think you can stop me? You think you can win? This battle? I'm inside your minds, Captain. There's no escape. Jason's heart raced, but he stood tall. We'll see about that. And with that, the battle for their minds and their very humanity began in earnest. The Vulpine wanted to break them. They wanted to make them doubt their strength, their will. But Jason knew the truth. They weren't fighting an enemy of flesh and blood. They were fighting an enemy of fear. And fear, no matter how powerful, could be defeated. The battle raged on, but it wasn't a war fought with guns or bombs. This was a war of wills. Jason and his team had fought the Vulpine on Earth's surface. But now they found themselves fighting on a battlefield far more treacherous, one that existed deep within their minds. The alien invaders' influence was insidious, creeping into every thought, twisting their perceptions, and warping the very fabric of their reality. Jason's eyes flickered over his soldiers. They were standing their ground, their weapons at the ready, but their faces were pale, their expressions clouded with doubt. Every one of them had been touched by the Vulpine, their minds infected by whispers in the dark. It was becoming harder to differentiate the truth from the lies the Vulpine were feeding them. The Vulpine leader stood at the edge of the battlefield, her orange fox-like fur rippling in the wind, her eyes glowing like twin embers. She seemed unaffected by the mental chaos swirling around them, her gaze unwavering as if she were watching a puppet show. She knew the mental assault was taking its toll on them. She had played this game countless times before. "You are already broken, Captain Jason," she called across the desert, her voice thick with amusement. "I can see it in your eyes. The doubt, the fear. You won't be able to fight much longer. Not with your minds in such disarray." Jason grit his teeth. The words were like daggers, sharp and pointed, and they landed with a heavy weight on his heart. But he didn't falter. His soldiers looked to him for strength, and he wasn't about to let them down now. "You've underestimated us," he shouted back, his voice steady despite the chaos inside his head. "We've fought too hard to back down now. We won't let you win." The Vulpine leader's lips curved into a knowing smile. "How long will you last, I wonder? You've already begun to break. Every second you stand here, I am inside your minds, your fears, your weaknesses, your memories. Soon you will forget who you are. And then you will be mine." Jason's heart skipped a beat. It wasn't just their thoughts she was toying with. She was trying to erase them entirely, to make them forget their purpose, their resolve, and their identity. A cold sweat ran down his back, but Jason refused to let the Vulpine see his fear. He clenched his fists and focused on the soldiers around him. If they were to survive, they would have to fight this battle together. Alone, they would fall, but together, they might stand a chance. "Stay strong," Jason shouted. "Don't let her in. Remember who we are. We're human. We fight for each other." The soldiers looked at each other, fear and doubt in their eyes, but Jason could see it, the flicker of recognition, the connection that bound them. They had been through hell together, and they weren't about to let an alien mind game break them now. The Vulpine leader saw the flicker of defiance, and her expression hardened. With a wave of her hand, the mental pressure intensified, and Jason's head felt like it was being crushed by an invisible force. His vision blurred, his mind clouded. He could hear the voices, his soldiers' voices, whispering doubts, fears, regrets. The Vulpine were trying to tear them apart from within. Jason staggered back, his knees buckling, but he fought it. He had to stay focused. The enemy wasn't here to defeat their bodies. They were here to break their spirit. He thought of his team, their courage, their sacrifice, and their unwavering loyalty. He thought of Earth, the people they were fighting to protect. He thought of everything that had brought him to this point. And in that moment, something clicked. The Vulpine were trying to steal their minds, but they couldn't take their hearts. Jason stood tall, shaking off the mental fog that had gripped him. He looked at his team, his voice now more powerful than ever. "We are not just soldiers, we are a family. And nothing, not even the Vulpine, can take that from us." The soldiers around him began to recover, their faces hardening with newfound resolve. The mental pressure from the Vulpine's influence lessened, and Jason could feel their strength returning. Together, they were stronger than any mind game the Vulpine could play. The Vulpine leader watched this transformation with growing frustration. She had underestimated them, thinking that their minds would break under the pressure, but she hadn't counted on their unity. She hadn't counted on their willpower. Her eyes narrowed and the air around them crackled with tension. "You think you can resist me?" she sneered. "You think your little human bonds are enough to stand against me? I am more than you can comprehend." But Jason wasn't intimidated. He was done playing her game. He turned to his soldiers, his voice filled with determination. "It's time to end this. We don't need to outsmart her. We need to outlast her." With that, Jason led his team into the heart of the battle, charging toward the Vulpine leader and her army. The air was thick with the weight of their mental warfare, but the humans were no longer breaking. They had found their strength, and together they would fight until the end. The Vulpine leader raised her hand, summoning the full force of her power, but Jason was ready. With every step he took, he pushed against the pressure in his mind, fortifying his thoughts with the strength of his team, his purpose, and his resolve. The Vulpine couldn't break them. They couldn't break the bond that held them together. As they closed in on the Vulpine leader, she let out a growl of frustration, her glowing eyes flashing with fury. "This is far from over," she hissed. But Jason didn't respond. He didn't need to. The final battle was upon them, and this time, the humans were the ones who would control the fight. No more tricks, no more manipulation. This would be a battle for their minds, and Jason would not let them lose. The shattering of their minds had only made them stronger, and now they would shatter the Vulpine's hold over them once and for all. The air crackled with energy as Jason and his team pressed forward, weapons drawn and minds locked in defiance against the Vulpine leader's psychic assault. The desert stretched out before them, bathed in the glow of the alien sky, but it felt like a different world now. The familiar land they'd fought to protect had become a battleground for their very thoughts, and the Vulpine leader had held the upper hand for far too long, but no longer. Jason had seen it, the flicker of doubt in her eyes, the brief hesitation, when she realized the humans had started to push back. That small crack in her confidence was all they needed. They were winning. Jason's soldiers, their eyes full of determination, stood beside him. The voices that had once whispered doubt and fear in their minds had faded, drowned out by their resolve. The mental assault from the Vulpine was still there, still powerful, but now they had a shield, a shared strength that the alien invaders hadn't anticipated. The Vulpine leader stood ahead of them, her orange fur shimmering like fire in the red-tinged light. Her eyes gleamed with anger, her fangs bared in a snarl. She was a predator, her every movement elegant yet lethal. But Jason knew she was beginning to realize that they were not prey. They were the hunters now. "You think you can stop me?" The Vulpine leader sneered. "You're nothing but insects. In my world, your minds are weak, your resolve pathetic." Jason stepped forward, his eyes locking with hers. "We may be human, but we're stronger than you think. We've fought battles you can't even comprehend, and we never give up." The Vulpine leader's eyes narrowed, a predatory smile curling at the corners of her lips. "You still don't understand, do you? You're fighting the wrong battle. It's not your bodies I want. It's your minds, your very souls. Once I have those, your bodies will follow." Jason felt the weight of her words pressing against his thoughts, but he forced himself to focus. She had come here to break them, to turn them into something they weren't. But they weren't just fighting for their survival, they were fighting for everything they stood for, and that made them powerful. "Not anymore," Jason said quietly. "You've lost," the Vulpine leader hissed in frustration. She raised her hand, and the air around them shimmered with unnatural energy, warping the space between them. Her voice, now laced with fury, echoed through the desert. "You think you can resist me? You're mine. You always have been." But this time, the mental assault didn't push them back. This time, they stood their ground. The power she wielded was vast, but it wasn't enough to break them. The humans had discovered the one thing the Vulpine couldn't control: their unity. Jason turned to his team, and in that moment, they shared something unspoken. They didn't need to say a word. They had been through the worst together, and now they were ready to finish this as one. They raised their weapons, not in attack, but in defiance. They weren't going to let her take their minds. They weren't going to let her win. Their resolve was unbreakable. The Vulpine leader's eyes widened as she realized what was happening. She was no longer in control. Her hold on their minds was slipping, and she could feel the weight of their collective strength pushing back against her power. "You can't," she growled, taking a step back. You should have given in. You should have let me win. But Jason didn't falter. You didn't understand, he said. We don't need to win with power. We win with will. And that's something you'll never break. With that, Jason's team surged forward. The Vulpine leader, though powerful, was now weakened. Her grip on their minds was fading, and her once unshakable confidence began to crumble. She tried to fight back, summoning the full force of her mental power, but it was too late. The humans had already won. In a final desperate move, the Vulpine leader released a burst of energy, a psychic shockwave that rattled the very air around them. Jason and his soldiers staggered, but they didn't fall. Their unity was too strong. With one last united push, they cut through the Vulpine leader's influence, breaking her hold over them entirely. The desert fell silent. The Vulpine leader stood motionless, her eyes wide with disbelief. This can't be, she whispered, her voice trembling. You're not supposed to win. Jason stepped forward, his face hard but resolute. We're human, and we'll never let fear control us. With that, the Vulpine leader staggered back, defeated not by force, but by the power of the human spirit. Her figure began to fade, her strength dissipating into the air, leaving only the echo of her presence behind. For the first time since the invasion had begun, the humans were truly free. The battle for Earth, for their minds, was over. As the last of the Vulpine vanished into the dust, Jason turned to his team. They were bruised, exhausted, and shaken, but they were still standing. They had faced the impossible and come out victorious. Not because they had the strongest weapons or the most advanced technology, but because they had something far more powerful. They had each other. We did it, Alex said, his voice cracking with relief. Jason nodded. We did. We'll rebuild, together. The desert was still, the red glow of the sky slowly fading as the sun began to rise. Earth had won, but the victory wasn't just over the Vulpine. It was a victory over fear, over manipulation, and over the idea that they were powerless. World was theirs once again. And this time, they would protect it, not just with their bodies, but with their hearts and minds. Humanity had triumphed, and that, the Vulpine had never anticipated.